Grandad's Dream, a River of Music.
This is a story about our family and the sources of our music.
Music runs like a river through the generations, and our passion for listening and playing music comes from our grandparents and from their stories, flowing from the places and dreams they passed on. My mother used to tell me stories while she plaited up my hair. These would be long hours where I would sit, listening, between her knees, feeling the comb pull and tug at my scalp.
There is one particular story I still remember, and it goes something like this.
Many years ago, before you or I were born, in a country thousands of miles from here called Sierra Leone, a man sat daydreaming. He was sitting in a chair by the window, his eyes closed. Outside, the night was dark and full of mosquitoes, which could be seen dancing in front of oil lamps.
When the man's wife walked in and saw her husband deep in reverie, she laughed.
"What are you thinking about?" she asked him. The man opened his eyes and looked at his wife. There was a smile on his face. "I dreamt I was conducting an orchestra," he told her, "and that I was playing the piano. There was an audience watching and everyone was clapping."
The woman laughed, for she thought her husband fanciful. There were no orchestras in Sierra Leone, let alone someone to conduct them.
Her husband must have been listening too hard to the cicadas singing in the grass outside.
Or the sounds of the distant river. They must have somehow worked their way into his dream.
The two had met in England years before. In Birmingham, it was an unlikely meeting. A young Welsh woman studying to be a primary school teacher, and the other a young Sierra Leonean man undertaking a teaching course in carpentry.
They met at a dance which was organised between the two colleges. It could have been fate that brought the two of them together that evening, laughing and dancing the night away, but it was love which carried the young woman across the sea aboard a ship to Sierra Leone, where they planned to build a life together, two young lovers full of dreams.
And build a life together they did. The woman fell completely in love with Sierra Leone, its thick green forests, its great rolling hills, the dusty earth which rose and fell in red smoke around cars. When it was dark, the sky stretched out impossibly. "My parents believed I would die out here," the woman told her husband one day, Riley. "They told me a deadly fever would take me." Her husband laughed. So in love was the young couple by this point, they were able to laugh at the fears of others, emboldened by their passion for one another. The woman's parents had known little of West Africa. They had advised their daughter not to go to Sierra Leone, fearing for her safety. But she hadn't listened. She had climbed aboard that ship all those years ago, young and certain, and hadn't looked back.
But sometimes when she listened to her husband singing around the house on the porch, Mende songs, the same songs she heard around the village, she would think of the Welsh choirs back at home, the songs she had grown up with, and suddenly the thousands of miles of ocean which stretched out between herself and Wales would feel a little less far.
4 children were born, 2 girls and 2 boys, and the couple were suddenly parents.
The woman would spend long hours sitting on the porch, watching as her children kicked the red earth into smoke. Sometimes they would run around trying to catch termites with their hands. Their dad would join them on the porch. He would ask each child in turn to scratch his back with a large comb whilst he sang songs and told stories. "One day I will conduct an orchestra," he told them, whilst his wife laughed and shook her head. "And I will play the piano. There will be a large audience and everyone will clap."
But then a great tragedy happened. One day, without warning, the man grew suddenly ill, and within a few months he had died. The cicadas sang very loudly in the grass that night. The woman sat down on the porch, listening to them, wondering whether they had always made her ears hurt.
She watched the night grow big and black around her.
I remember my mum pausing at this point in the story. She turned my head to one side, bringing it to rest on her knee so that she could work on the other side of my head. By then, all the partings on my head were finished, neat, orderly lines, like train tracks, tunnelling through all the thick curls. She moved a section of hair carefully to one side and then made a start on the first plait. "There is another story," she told me.
"One which also takes place many years before you or I were born, thousands of miles across the ocean. But this story begins in the Caribbean, in a small country called Antigua and Barbuda. Here, a man stood listening.
He was standing outside the home of a wealthy expatriate family where classical music floated through the open windows and into the street below. The music sounded so sweet. It made the man think of rum and pineapple and other sweet-tasting things. Standing on his tiptoes, he listened more closely.
It was the violin which had first made the man fall in love with classical music. So enchanted was he by the sound of the instrument that he had taken up lessons as a child, hoping to recreate the sounds he had heard drifting from the windows of the large expatriate homes. He had dreams of performing in front of large audiences, playing sonatas, concertos, bowing to rapturous applause.
But the money soon ran out. His parents weren't able to afford the lessons, and so the violin, with its plaintive melodies and haunting tunes, soon became nothing more than a painful dream.
When the man fell in love, he decided to leave the Caribbean. The woman he had fallen in love with had found work in post-war England as a nurse, and the man, determined not to lose her, followed her by ship. England was cold, the cities grey. The man had been a brilliant mathematician in the Caribbean. Now he was a bus conductor.
The public transport services were clamouring for workers. So was the National Health Service. These were the jobs available to Caribbean migrants at this time. It wasn't easy, not by any stretch. The couple had to work hard to save up enough money to buy a house, and harder still to raise a family. 2 children were born, a boy and a girl, and they wanted to give them the best possible chance at life, one of opportunity and access.
That was when they bought the upright piano, a small, second-hand instrument with clunky keys which needed to be tuned regularly. The children fell in love with it. The man would come home every day tired after a long day of work, and he would pause, even just for a moment, outside his house, listening. Beautiful piano music floated from the windows of his small, hard-earned home. The music sounded so sweet. Standing on his tiptoes, the man would close his eyes and sigh.
And that brings us nearly to the end of our story, my mum said. I have told you about 2 families, both from different parts of the world, both with dreams and aspirations. This next part of our story takes place much more recently, and not too far from here, at a university in the south of England. There, a woman was studying English, and a man was studying physics.
The 2 of them met and clashed spectacularly, but then, as sometimes happens, they became friends, and then they fell in love. One day, the woman turned to the man. "I want to have children," she said. The man suggested 3, but the woman wanted 4. They decided to settle on a compromise. The 2 numbers were added together, and 7 children were born, a family much larger than either of them had expected.
I remember my head feeling tight from all plaits by this point. The coconut oil from my hair was the only aroma in the room. My mum's hands were working against the back of my head, and I had a sense of things coming to an end. They all moved into a house together in Nottingham. The windows were always flung wide and music floated from the house, down into the street below. Neighbours and passers-by would pause to listen. The music came from the children. Each of them had learned to play an instrument, the violin, the viola, the piano, the cello, and there was never a silent moment in the house.
One day, the woman went into the room of her 10-year-old daughter, who was sitting composing something by the piano. Her eyes were closed, and there were sheets of manuscript paper laid out on the piano in front of her. "What are you composing?" her mum asked her, sitting down on the piano stool next to her daughter. "It's a concerto," the young girl told her. "A piece for piano and orchestra. I want to play it myself."
Outside, evening was turning into night, and flies could be seen dancing beneath streetlights.
The woman looked at her daughter and she saw her dad sitting on his porch all those years ago, and all she could think was, all these years later. Story written by Konya Kanneh-Mason.